Yeah. 7:25. Okay, tell everyone. Reminder again, after Maariv tonight will be an opportunity to sell chametz. Tomorrow morning after Shachrit, that's your last chance with me. Okay, let's talk a little bit tonight about the four signs, at least one of them. We have coming up next week, Leila Seder, we'll read the Haggadah. We have the famous passage of the four sons, Echad Chacham, Echad Rasha, Echad Tam, Echad Sheno Yodeh Lishlo. And probably the most spoken about of the four sons, probably fair to say, is the Rasha, the Ben HaRasha, the wicked son. And I'd like to share with you a Perush, which I heard a number of years ago, the framework of this Perush. And ever since, I've never looked at the Ben HaRasha the same way. It's a little bit of a drush, but I think that it carries a message which is very true and very poignant and very relevant to our times. So, as we know, each of the four sons appears in the Haggadah, but prior to that, it appears in the Torah as well, in the Chumash. And there are a number of differences, a number of discrepancies in the way that these questions and answers are related in the Chumash versus the way that they appear in the Haggadah. Rav Weitzman spoke, those were at the Yom Niyun, about the Bavli, the Yerushalmi, also have slightly different versions of how this transpires. But in any event, let's focus just on the Rasha in the short time we have in front of us. So in the Haggadah it says, Rasha ma'u omer. What does the wicked son say? He says, Ma ha'avodah hazot lachem. What is this work to you? Lachem v'lo lo. To you, for you and not for him. Right? And that sort of seems to be the indication that this is the Ben HaRasha, right? He doesn't see himself as part of it. He says, it's for you, it's not for us, it's not for me. Haggadah continues, since he has removed himself from the framework from the nation, so he has become a heretic. So too, you should blunt his teeth, so to speak. You should tell him, we have the pasuk, Bavul Zeb, for this Hashem took us out. And again, we answer him back. He said, Lachem v'lo lo. So we answer him back. We say, Li v'lo lo, for us and not for you. Ilo haya sham lo haya nigav. That's how the Haggadah ends off. If he was there, he wouldn't have come out. By the way, I'm sure many are familiar with the concept, and many talk about it, that in our generation, there is, of course, tragically, there's a fifth son, the one who's didn't even make it to the Seder, right? The Rasha is there. So it's already strange when we say if he was there, he wouldn't have been redeemed. He was there and he was redeemed. So what's going on here? This is a little bit strange. So the first question we can ask, again, I mentioned the fact, and the Haggadah seems to dwell on the point, that it's lachem v'lo lo, that he says it's for you, it's not for me, I wasn't part of it. But of course, the Chacham expresses himself in a very similar manner as well. The Chacham says, Ma edot v'chukim v'mishpatim asher tziva Hashem Elokeinu etchem, to you. So there we don't say, it's chem v'lo oti. There we don't, right? He's the Chacham, he's fine, he can say whatever he wants. But the Rasha comes along, says the same thing. What's the difference? Why is it so bad when the Rasha says it and not when the Chacham says it? That's one question. Another question, the fact that, again, if he was there, he wouldn't have been redeemed. Seemingly he was there. And if we go into the Psukim and we see where they appear, so we know that 3 of the 4 sons appear together at the end of Parashat Bo. There's one who appears later on in Sefer in Chumash Devarim, and that is the Ben HaChacham. And that's already maybe an answer to us. When the Ben HaChacham comes along and says that which Hashem commanded you, so he's a generation later. He wasn't there. So he's saying, what happened to you? Right, the story that you've told me, that's fine. But the Rasha, he was there. We'll see in a moment. We'll see the Psukim. So for him to say, for you and not for me, what do you mean? You were there as well. Right? So the Psukim say as follows. The way the Torah expresses it is like this. It says, V'hayaki tavo el, after the mitzvah, Korban Pesach, etc. It says, V'hayaki tavo el haaretz, when you come to the land, asher yiten Hashem lachem, which Hashem will give you, Kasher deber, as it's commanded, Ushmartem et avodah azot, and you will keep this avodah, the service, the Korban Pesach, this is now in Mitzrayim, but when you come to Eretz Yisrael, and you'll do it again. Interesting, we have to understand why now this is the Ben HaRasha is about to make his appearance in the Chumash. But the introduction, the framework of it is Vayaki tavo la'aretz. When you come here, when you come into Eretz Yisrael, why is that is that necessarily intrinsically connected to this idea? So says the Torah, your children will come and ask, they'll say, what is that? Right? That's the question of the Rasha. What is the service to you? This is the Korban Pesach, right? The night when Hashem passed over our homes in Mitzrayim. Again, this is the answer which the Chumash gives, is not the answer which the Haggadah gives. Haggadah says, Babul Zeh. And now concludes three very interesting words. And the people here heard this and they bowed down to give thanks. Rashi says, what does it mean? People bowed their head. He says, this was a sort of thanksgiving gesture for the fact that the Besorah, the good tidings of the Geula, of the redemption and coming to the land, and the tidings of the children that they're going to have. Now again, which son is this that's being discussed? Yeah, this is the Ben Arasha. So this is the one with the Ben Arasha, the wicked son. This is where you're going to bow down and give thanks. Okay, so that's interesting as well. That makes us stop and think. So maybe we can suggest the following. Maybe the Ben Arasha is actually a little bit misunderstood. And how so? Maybe what he's suggesting is this. When the Torah tells us, and again, as I mentioned, there's a little bit of drift going on here, but the meaning is as follows. When the Torah says, when you come into the land of Israel, we can understand now, in the land of Israel, in our current societal situation that we're in, we can understand a little bit better who the Ben Arasha is and what the question he's asking and why he's asking the question. When we say, Iluhu aya sham lo aya nigal, it's interesting, Yerushalmi, by the way, changes it. Yerushalmi says, Ilu aya oto ha'ish b'Mitzrayim, lo aya ra'ui legael misham le'olam. If that person had been in Mitzrayim, he wouldn't have come out. In other words, the Ben Arasha, the way that you are acting now, the question that you ask, not when you were in Mitzrayim, you were like everybody else and you came out with everybody else. Now you're behaving differently. And if your current behavior was that now, which you have now in the land of Israel, if that was your behavior back there, you wouldn't have come out into it. In other words, the Ben Arasha is coming along and he's saying the following. He's saying, look, I understand that when we were there, when we were in Mitzrayim, or when we were in the Galut, when we were in the Shtetl or the ghetto, wherever it was, I was there, I was right there with you. I was doing everything that you're doing. Ha'avodah zot lachem. I was keeping all the rituals and keeping all the folklore and keeping everything that you do, because that's what made us who we are. That's what gave us our identity as a Jewish people. When we were out there in exile, we didn't have a land, we didn't have a language, we didn't have a culture, we didn't have all the things, the ordinary things, so to speak, which other nations have, which makes them a people and gives them an identity. We were in exile. So what identity did we have? Torah and mitzvot. Okay, says the, I understand that there was a need for it. I understand as a national, but now we're here, now we're in Eretz Yisrael. He says, Ma avodah zot lachem. What is this? Why are you still doing this? This was relevant when we were out there in the Galut. It's not relevant anymore. Now we have a land, we have a language, we have a flag, we have an army, we have a government, we have a state, we have all these things. We don't need it anymore. Right? And he says, the Yerushalmi, the way it phrases the question of the Ben Arasha, says, Ma Torah hazeh shatem matrichim aleinu b'kol shana v'shana. What is this Torah? What is this tircha? What is this bother? Well, we have to go now and clean the house and for a month and go through and every crumbs of chametz and all these things. There are more important, in other words, says the Ben Arasha, there are more important things to focus on. There are more important things. We can change the world. We're a startup nation. We've got all sorts of things that we can do. And instead, you're talking to me about chametz and matzah. You're talking to me about, this old Talmud, this archaic, these laws that you have. 2,000 years ago, they were relevant. Now, who needs it? Now it's Torah. Now I don't want it anymore. Rav Kook has a remarkable essay called Ma'amar Hador. Rav Kook writes, and he says, basically at the time, this was when the new questions started coming up in terms of the whole movement of secularism and the early Zionists who came, who on the one hand were coming here and were building up the country and building up the land and felt very strongly about it and passionately about it and even at risk of death. But on the other hand, they threw away everything that had come before in terms of Torah and mitzvot and our national Jewish identity, everything that kept us going for thousands of years. And how do you look at these people? So most of the Rabbanim looked at them, looked down on them. And Rav Kook has a remarkable essay where he says, you have to look at these people. It's not because of their katnut. It's not because that of the smallness that they're throwing off what's come before, but it's because of a certain gadlut nefesh. He says this is a generation which cares passionately about changing the world, cares passionately about doing things, about making a great impact, doing important things. For them, they look at this, and they look at folklore, and they look at ritual, and they don't understand, they don't see how this ties in with the bigger picture. Of course, the answer is, who's right? Everybody's right. The answer is, and that's why the Haggadah says, we turn to the Ben Harasha and we say, look, you have to understand something. This is the reason why. What is Ba'avul Zeh? Ba'avul Zeh, as we'll go on, Rav Weitzman mentioned that we say this pasuk 4 times throughout the Haggadah. We're going to get to our matzah and our maron. We're going to point to it. We're going to say, this is the reason. This is the reason to fulfill these mitzvot, to keep these minutiae, to keep these details of halakha. You're making a mistake. Don't think that there's a grand picture, that there's a big idea, there's a big ideal of changing the world or whatever it is. And we're stuck because we don't connect to that big picture, but we're stuck with these small details. No, those small details, that's what Hashem gave us. Those are the mitzvot. That's the way we're going to make that impact. It's going to be one family sitting at home eating the Korban Pesach, and another household, and another household, and another, and all of those are going to join together. All those details and all that halakha, that is going to be ultimately that's what's going to create the Geulah. Ultimately, that's what's going to bring it. And so therefore that is the answer to the Ben Harasha. But we're saying you have to understand, the way that you're speaking now, okay, if you were like that back then in Mitzrayim, so you wouldn't have been redeemed. He's not saying I want to disassociate myself from the Jewish people, but he's misguided. He thinks that everything that we're doing on the Seder night, all these details, are a Torah. And the message is no, Torah is never a Torah. Torah is not a halakha, it's not a bother. But that is part of the grand vision. That is why Hashem took us out. There is no shalach ami without vayavdun. Hashem send out my people so that they can serve me. The 4 expressions of Geulah, the 4 cups of wine. V'otzeiti, v'itzalti, v'ga'alti, v'lakachti. The first 2, again, the Mepharshim say different ideas. What is each expression? What is each stage of redemption? What does it mean? But generally, the understanding is the first 2 are a sort of end to physical slavery, sort of a physical redemption, and then from Ga'alti v'lakachti moves more towards a spiritual type of redemption. And we can't have any sort of interruption between those 2 cups, because if you think it's just about a physical redemption without the spiritual redemption, you miss the point. You miss the point of Yetziat Mitzrayim. So that is maybe the idea. That is the vision and the drive and the passion that we can learn from the Ben Harasha, and the way to channel that and the way to channel it appropriately, which is found in the answer that is given to him by the Baal Haggadah.